What up, everybody? Scuff D here, and long and last, it's time for the Mechanicum Card by Card reboot. Been doing the card by card reboots. I think I started doing them over a year ago. I want to say when the Ruin Storm dropped, possibly. I realized I had to go back, do the card by cards for all the factions, seeing various patches, updates. There was new mechanics that had been added to the game. It just felt right. And gradually, through the course of time, eventually got through all those remake card by cards. Finished the card by card reboots for the new factions that have been added to the game since then. And the neutrals in that time just expanded significantly. Way back from the very first Mechanicum card by card I did, I would think we probably had about a third of how many neutrals there are now. That might be an exaggeration, maybe half. But they get new cards every faction or every expansion, so it continues to grow. And obviously neutrals changed. So this is going to be a card by card reboot. This is part 1 for the Mechanicum. The card pool is so vast for these neutrals that I've really got to split them up into videos of threes. So we're going to do series 1, which will cover the Warlords, as well as cards through energy cost 2. I want to see 3, 4, and then 6, 7. How about energy cost 3? That's a lot. There's a lot of energy cost 3 there. That's maybe more. Let's do Warlords and energy cost 2, and then part 2 and part 3 will probably be 3 through 6, and then 7 through 10. That sounds good. That sounds right. So you can look forward to that, and then when we're done with the Mechanicum, obviously we're going to be doing the same thing with Chaos. So let's get into the Warlords, shall we? Let's do it. Let's talk about it. First off, Anacra Scoria. This guy has seen a resurrection. I want to say resurrection because he really was never potent at the start when he first dropped. But his health used to be 35. His Xanathite Ambient just recently got changed back to how it was before, which is a cool little special card here that allows him at 5 energy to ping for 4. Ping 1 time 4 random times. For a moment, this was 5 for 5, but his ability is really kind of what makes it nice. His ability is basically the old drilling site. For 0 energy, basically a free energy, he just refills 2 energy. So, late game, theoretically, you're paying 3 energy, because you're paying 5 to ping 4 times, but then you use his ability to get 2 of that back. So you've really only down 3 energy, so then you can still do what you need to do. And these pings do add up. They add up whether they're on a mono warlord or if they're gradually taking off units from the board who have 1 health or 2 health. It's a really nice card. In it, when he was an event warlord, that actually was a permanent that you just played on him, kind of like a Medusan Carapace, but it was very, very high. And then when they changed that to 5 and they gave him 5 extra health, a lot of people jumped on the train. Got some Burn Scoria, got some Solar Auxilius Scoria, because Solar Auxilius, it's relatively okay. Kind of gets squeezed in. There's some of the troop buffs. Got a lot of front line. Nothing better than protecting a Techpriest with front line. I personally have got a Scoria build that uses the the Tagmata formation, as well as the good old Loss of Innocence, Death of Innocence card. Get 2 copies of those, because you're also kind of paying only 3 energy when you play that, so you're not falling behind curve. And then every Mechanicum card that you play gets 2 marks of chaos. And then for extra juice and spice, I threw in the old Heretechnica, which I think is somewhere in the 3s. Or is it a 2? Oh, it's a chaos card. That's right, they moved it. Those bastards. They changed what it did altogether. But that card gives all your Mechanicum troops a mark of chaos. So it's a great way to get like 3 marks of chaos with all your Mechanicum troops. Possibly change some things into demons if you've got some Mechindrites and all that fun stuff. But it's fun. It's just a Mimi thing. That's how I play him. But really, this ability is pretty versatile. You can do a burn scoria, you could do a troop scoria, you could do a vehicle scoria, you could do a high cost build where you're throwing down a lot of high cost stuff. You could do cultist scoria. Having an ability that refills energy is very nice. I always liked that about him. The problem is his health. That 5 extra health makes a big difference in the decks that he wants to play. First off, he's a neutral, so neutral burn is possible, but it's tricky. It's trickier because your pool, even though the neutral pool is so vast, there's only a few really good cards. A lot of the powerful burn cards are faction specific. So the best thing he's got going for him is his reliable Xanathite. And then from there, you've got to rely on other things. Standard vehicle builds, Helios Mortar Carrier, Doombringer, things like that. Or do you rely on Mortar Strikes, which is always a good neutral, possibly Artillery Strike, Defensive Fire, defensive satellites. The old tried and trues, but having 5 extra health gives you a turn, maybe 2 turns, to make the difference. And as a legendary warlord, he should have 40 health, quite frankly. So he's really good. He's really fun. I enjoy him for what he does. But it's important to note that he's not a one-trick pony. He can go in a lot of builds. You just have to know what you're doing with him. Sometimes there are some games where once you have to start making attacks with him and not using his ability to refill energy, you're kind of hurting yourself in the foot. Also, on top of that, if you're using his stuff too soon, you can deplete your hand. So you want to make sure that you've got stuff that can either replenish your hand or give you options on the board. Maybe stuff that uses energy. Troops that have attacks or abilities that cost energy, and therefore you're benefiting. This is a 0 cost card, but this guy here is a 1 just to boost up the front line. You really don't lose anything if you've got Scoria refilling that too. Or maybe you've got Kai Zalane who cost 1, or I like the Rainer Squad. This technically could be just a 1 energy to deal 4 damage, and they've got a relatively high health. Downside is they come on 4, so you just have. That's why I think Velateris people go with the Solar Auxilia, because this is free with Scoria. He's a Solar Auxilia. He's got a little bit better attack coming in at 4, but we're getting off the mark. End of story. Scoria, decent warlord. I have fun with them. Half of these matches I would say were before the buff, and the other half are after the buff with the change in build. Because before the buff, I wasn't doing Death of Innocence build. I was doing something else altogether. I think I was doing vehicles, Mechanicum vehicles build, and I just shifted over to Death of Innocence, and I've had a lot of fun with it. Caliber Hal, this guy is the originator, the fabricator, the propaginator, the dominator, the big guy. He's the first Mechanicum warlord that the game ever had. His ability got changed a couple different times because he really wasn't sticking. He always made Mechanites, but this refill energy was off. His ability cost was off. It's really... Caliber Hal is a combo horse, depending on your troops, and there's a couple key troops that you want to have with him. He gets 2 energy when a friendly Mechanicum troops dies. Now, that's really only beneficial when it is on your turn, but if you have high health troops or your opponent has not killed troops, or you've got troops that are in stealth with 1 health, such as the 3 ones where they have these 2/2 guys. The Rotel are very handy with him, and the Alpha Row are also really... These guys are like a 3/1. If they survive, you attack, you deal 3 damage, and then you get 2 free energy. But what's nice about them especially is you get Mechanites created with Caliber Hal for 0. So every turn, pretty much you're using his ability to pump up your hand with Mechanites. And Mechanites, we should pause right now before we continue further to take a look at what they are. Those are deckable. They're cards that you cannot include in your deck, but they're Mechanites that get created through the course of the game by a variety of Mechanicum cards. You can either get the Chaos Mechanite, which is 1 energy, gives a mark of chaos only to an infantry or Astartes, not to a vehicle. You've got the Medicaid Mechanite, also giving +3 plus health to a friendly infantry or Astartes. All the Mechanites are only on infantry Astartes. They do not work on vehicles. You've got the offensive, which gives cleave 2. You've got the optical, which gives +3/+0. And you've got one that gives shield. These Mechanites have seen some changes over the course of time. I don't need to get into that. Their one used to give bloodthirst. We never had this one that gave heal. And from there, I think things have just kind of improved for the better. This cleave, the fact that they can stack, and even if you're building a Mechandrite that, you've got like 4 or 5 offensive Mechandrites, you throw that down on the right unit, you've got a cleave 6 or a cleave 8. That's dealing a lot of damage to adjacent troops, possibly surviving against the troops that it's playing. So Caliber Hall pumps out Mechandrites every turn. And then he relies really on either a Zagreus Kane or the old classic. And I know I'm clicking on these very quickly. But the Merits Mercenaries. Both of these cards get buffs when you play cards. The Zagreus Kane specifically gets buffs when you play Mechandrites on him. Specifically Mechandrites. Which means he's getting the boost of the Mechandrites, and then he's also getting +1/+1. He comes in a little cheaper than the Merits Mercenaries. So basically the strategy for Caliber Hall is create a bunch of Mechandrites, play a troop, protect the troop, dump all the Mechandrites, and then you have a super beefy troop that you can continue to support. And if you're at even turn energy 5, you can actually potentially play 5 or more Mechandrites if you've got other troops on the board that you can kill and refill your energy by 2. So that's important to note. That's where that passive comes in. Really handy is if you set up a stealth troop, you can play a troop, you can kill your stealth troop, you have 2 free energy, that's 2 free Mechandrites that you can now play and make that next troop stronger to either resist Melgator, hard removal, flanking, whatever the case that you want to be. Because, that all those Mechandrites enhance stats in some way or another. So, giving shield, they don't give survivor, but there's a card that does, and we'll get to that in a sec. So, that's Caliber Hall, that's Scoria, that's the Mechandrites. Let's get to the rest of the Techpriests. So Tacitus Proctor, another warlord that saw a little bit of change, but really I had fun with him. I've put up a deck list in the past with Tacitus Proctor. I play him currently when there's the play Mechanicum troops or play vehicles challenge, because he puts in play both a Mechanicum troop that is a vehicle for 1 energy. It's very easy. It's all he does. 1 energy, put in play a Servo Automata. The Automata right here is a 1/1. If your opponent doesn't kill it on your turn, you can either use it to create Mechandrites. Again, we're going back to the Mechandrites. Or you continue to buff it because he has a Relentless that gives +1/+1 to your vehicles in play. And that's all of your vehicles. All they have to do is survive your turn. So you really just run a lot of vehicles with Proctor. There's not a lot of strategy there, but there is some selection as far as vehicles that you use. And as I mentioned in the deck list video that I did for Proctor, there's a couple units that I really enjoy, as well as a couple infantry units that work really well with vehicles. Delta Psi is a great start. We'll talk about that in just a second. I also like to use, way down here, not the hoplites, the the Macrotech engines here, which gives shield to all your vehicles. And then you've got cards like, Forbidden Protocols, Cybernetica Cortex, things that basically boost your vehicles stronger. And then you and maybe a Technical Servitor if you really want to, fake out your opponent. This is kind of a gamble. We'll talk about that like 3 cards from now. There's so much to talk about with the Mechanicum. So that's what he does. You get vehicles, you get strong vehicles, they stick, they get bigger, they go forward, and your opponent then has kind of a snowball problem to deal with. The vehicles that have stealth, and there are a couple, Rotel is one, the Firewalkers in the Imperial Army is another. Those are kind of your good go-tos to kind of let sit, get bigger for a couple turns, and they're 5 or 6 attack, and then you can start swinging with those, because by the time they're out there, your opponent has to deal with that card, plus the servo automata that you built this turn, plus maybe another vehicle or two that you played. So that's really how he plays. He snowballs and he pumps out vehicles, and you continue to do that. The problem is he has low initiative. So in some matchups, he falls behind because your opponent can put a troop on the board, claim board very quickly. But if you build right and you get a little bit of the draw right, and you keep persistent on making vehicles and putting those vehicles out, some of those games can come to a big swing, especially if you throw down like the shield on all vehicles, or you throw down a Doombringer that helps clear a board. I have fun with Proctor. As I said, he's really great for challenges, that if you're doing, the play vehicles or play Mechanicum troops. He's not the best of the tech priests. He's not the best, but he's not the worst. Well, you could argue he's the worst. That'd be a hard argument, because he has a place. The Myrmidon Destructor. This is another one that's got an interesting energy refill. This one refills 1 energy when an enemy dies. Again, refilling energy is really only handy on your turn. So if your opponent has any troops that are alive at the start of your turn and you kill them, you're kind of getting some energy back. Really handy with like a defensive satellites that wipes out the board. You actually get more. If they've got 6 troops and you kill all 6 of the defensive satellites, you're getting 6 energy to play a 5 energy card. That's a little bit of scheming, wheeling, dealing. You're making money. Now they're paying you. They're paying you to be the boss. It's a pyramid scheme joke. Yeah. So refill 1 energy when an enemy dies, and then he's got a mini Perturabo. That's really where he compares to. He's got medium initiative as opposed to low. 1 energy. He preps his siege. It's cheaper than Perturabo's, which is a 2, and then for 1 energy he deals 4 damage. 1 less than Perturabo. That's where the comparisons end, though, because Perturabo has the Iron Warriors card pool. Myrmidon Destructor has the card pool of the neutrals. And while there are Artillery Strike, Defensive Satellites, Seek and Destroy, there's a lot of cards, obviously, that do damage within the neutral card pool. He doesn't have anything for troops. If he's relying on troops to do damage, he's got to rely on the same staples, really, that Caleb Hal, Caleb Decima, Scoria are relying on too. If you had to pick between the two, a Burn Destructor and a Burn Scoria, Burn Scoria might be the better pick at this point in time. Just because, A, Scoria has got 5 health more, and Scoria has got a consistent 4 damage every turn for 3, whereas Myrmidon Destructor has got 4 damage every other turn for 2. So while that may cost more for Scoria, he can get that every turn, and that's going to stack up a lot faster. This is still really great, though, for a first turn, board control. You're going to deal 4 damage. Your opponent knows you can kill whatever 4 health or less troop that they play. It really changes how they play. The trick is then following up with that. He's really good in events, which is where I played him the most. Obviously, I've only played a couple of games with him after we got him unlocked, because I'm not a Perturabo fan either. I don't play a lot of Perturabo games. I just don't like that style. It's great, but I'd rather play stuff that relies on troops or other things. So, not a bad Warlord. I'm not trying to downsell him. He does definitely have a place, but he doesn't have the same shine as either Scoria or Perturabo. If you had your choices, I would recommend another Warlord over him, just for the simple fact that the other Warlords have better synergy with Mechanicum cards. He really doesn't. Caleb Decima, the last Warlord we're going to get to. It's been a long time since I played Caleb, obviously. I think the last time I played him was obviously before we had these woman stats buffs, and he's really one of those ones where he does what he does. He stuns every turn. You can basically stun your enemy Warlord and deal 1 damage to them for 2 energy. The fact that he refills 1 when you play Mechanicum Troop is really great, because that means every turn, as long as you're playing either 2 Mechanicum Troops or one lower cost Mechanicum troop, you can still follow it up with his ability every turn. And that's really important. I think a lot of people that make the mistake when they're playing Decima sometimes is they stop using his ability. Or they take a turn where they don't use his ability because they want to play one tactic. And that is a problem, because that is when the Warlord that your opponent's been sitting on waiting to use, they really use to their advantage, because maybe they've got 2 or 3 cards to help support that play at that point in their hand. So when you're playing Decima, I highly recommend never passing on his ability. Now, there are some times where you have no choice, but if you're in that position, be aware that you are in danger of losing the game, because the whole point of Decima is stunning the enemy Warlord every turn, as well as putting on a little damage to it, and being able to support that by playing Mechanicum troops at a pseudo reduced cost. Basically, every Mechanicum troop you costs 1 less, because when you play it, you get 1 energy back. So at a 10 energy turn, you could conceivably play 10 Mechanicum troops and get, or 6 Mechanicum troops. I should keep the board simple, right? 6 Mechanicum troops and get 6 energy back, and then therefore you have maybe still at least 6 energy to work with. That's where cards like Automata Formation are very nice with him, because that's free energy. And you're paying 6, even if you're only getting 2 units, you're getting 2 energy for that. You've just played this for 4. This is a good card for Decima, especially. Any card that puts in multiple units is going to be good. They don't have to come from hand. So, where does he fall in? Is he the best? Is he not? It's hard to say. I think all of these have got their place. They all play a certain way. And that's one thing I like about the Mechanicum Warlords. We've got 5 different Mechanicum Warlords. Every single one of them does something different. Caliber Hall is more of the Mechindrite guy. Tacitus Proctor is definitely vehicle heavy. Myrmidon Destructor, you could argue, is burn-centric. Decima is much more the control and troop build. And Scoria is the very flexible. You can play him a variety of ways. So I like that. I really like the Warlords. I like all the Warlords. It's a shame that the Myrmidon Destructor isn't a named character. It is a big shame, if you ask me, that Zagreus Kane is not a Warlord. Without going into it on the card by card, Zagreus Kane is basically the loyalist equivalent of Caliber Hall in the lore. Caliber Hall declares for Horus. He's the Fabricator General of Mars. He sides with Horus. The Mechanicum, half of them are with him, and the other half are loyal to the throne or loyal to Terra. That half is led by Zagreus Kane, who gradually makes some severe modifications to himself, which is kind of the whole lore point of his getting buffed by Mechindrites. But he declares himself Fabricator General. And then you've got 2 Fabricator Generals and a lot of Techpriests in the middle deciding who is the true and who to follow. And then through the course of that time, we eventually get the Adeptus Mechanicus. We get the Mars Civil War, which is, that's the central figure of it. But do we follow the Omnissiah? Is the Omnissiah the Emperor? Is it some other divinity? Well, I'm getting too much into lore here on the card by card. But the point is, I wish he was a Warlord. He's not. In the meantime, we'll just have to make do. As far as all the ones here, I think if you want to play neutrals, if you really want to get that Techpriest vibe, you're not going to go wrong picking up any of these in the shop. They're not bad. They're neutral Warlords. I have fun with them. Some I have less fun with because I haven't played in a while, but they play a certain way. And if you're in the mood for that, and you want to throw down some vehicles, go for it. Let's see here. Let's get into. I just realized I'm in with the icons. So let's get into the actual cards that we've talked about. The Warlords here. I would have to say, if I'm rating them. I would rate, honestly, a lot of people get sour about Decima, and Decima can shut down some mono Warlords pretty well. I would probably say Scoria is the top, and then I'd follow it up with Caliber Hall, Caleb Decima, Destructor. You could say those guys are kind of equal. Proctor at the bottom. None of them are bad. Some of them just don't get played a whole lot. It just depends on how you want to play them. I have fun with all of them. I have the most fun, honestly, with Proctor. I've played the most games with Proctor. Have I played the most games? Oh, 3 more games with Scoria. Scoria takes the lead. Yep, Scoria in the lead for that. So I guess apparently I've had more fun with Scoria. Drilling Site. Drilling Site recently got changed. Big change. Very important change for the game. It still is a good card. It does things a little differently. This for 0 gives you 1 energy this turn that allows to give you a little bit of an edge, a boost play. Still a good card. A card worth picking up in the shop. Having at least one of these in a deck is nice. The card used to support Warlords who had a 2 energy ability, allowing them to use their ability on curve, especially if it was like a troop support ability. Can no longer do that. However, you can play a 6 energy card at 5 energy, and sometimes that makes a big difference. Or less energy if you've got some other reductions available. So this is still a good card, for sure. As an epic, it's probably one of the classic epics, and I don't think that has lost any status with the changes. People have just had to adjust how they play with it. Technical servitors. I talked about this a little bit with Proctor. I think you could make the argument for this going in several Mechanicum decks. I actually do like this card specifically with Caleb Decima because it is free energy. You pay these guys at 0, you get 1 energy. So if you play your game and your turn right, you save these guys. They're just a 1/1. If they survive, that's fantastic. Your next vehicle this turn costs you less. Wow. Especially with the changes to the cost reduction, it's nice to still have something that can reduce the cost by 2. But as I said, they're a 1/1, so they've got to survive. But if you're taking advantage of just playing them for Decima, you at least are still getting use out of that. I think they probably make the best use in either him or Caliber Hall if he pumps him up with a couple Mechindrites. Like if he's got an abundance of Mechindrites, I think he's got better things to put the Mechindrites on, quite frankly. And if you're playing Hall, you shouldn't be playing vehicles because Mechindrites don't go in vehicles. So, yeah. Pride of Mars. I don't like this card. I know some people play it. Spend all your energy put in play a random Mechanicum troop that costs that much. If you are very aware of the card pool and very aware as far as how much energy you have, what that will get you, that could be decent at higher turns. At late turns, it's going to get you junk. Or early turns, I should say. 1 energy, you're going to get an Arcadius, which you won't get the rally. You'll either get a 1/3 or you'll get a 1/2 with frontline. Only on the rally, so you won't get that either. So the best you could hope for is a 1/3 for 0. Not worth it. You could get 0. Well, I guess you could get a Technical Servitors if you had no energy. I just don't play it. I just don't play that card. Arcadius used to be really kind of the only go-to stealth removal, but we have gotten multiple stealth removals over the course of the game at this point. They try to include a stealth hate in every faction at this point. So these guys don't get played a whole heck of a lot. They have a place, if you're early on a player in the game and you don't have any stealth removal, and you have an Arcadius, I recommend having an Arcadius in your deck. That doesn't mean just throw them down just to throw them down. You want to make sure you're using them at the right time to remove stealth, because they remove all stealth, not just random stealth or stealth from one unit, or, stealth this turn. It's all stealth, and that's pretty powerful. It helps you clear board, helps you hit the enemy warlord. The downside is it comes on this 1/1, this frail 1/1 body, which sometimes can be a liability in games against Korax or in games against the Night Haunters. So you do want to play them carefully if you are playing them. But as I said, I think once you start to get other stealth hate options, you'll phase these guys out and move on to other things. Epsilon Sigma, not much to say about a 1/3. Likely you'll get these guys generated by cards, by Automata formation, but I wouldn't put them in your deck. I just wouldn't. They don't do anything. They're a 1/3. They're not worth including. Eat a pie. Eat a pie. Have some ice cream. there's an argument to be made for these guys to be in like an Imperial Fist deck. And I know people don't like Imperial Fist, they don't like structure decks, but there's an argument to be made to pay 1 energy and get a 2/3 frontline. Because you're kind of doing that with some of the Imperial Fists Astartes. That being said, that's about it. Otherwise, if you're getting him generated from a card, he's a 1/2. He doesn't do anything else. He doesn't have frontline. If you're not playing structures, there's no reason to put him in your deck. So you gotta build appropriately. Life support. I like this card. I have at least one of these in all of my decks, in all my Mechanicum decks, I should say. Decks that have got a lot of Mechanicum troops. Because first off, it removes poison. And there are a couple cards that remove poison, but there's not too many, and there's nothing worse than having your awesome buffed up vehicle poisoned, and then it dies. Whereas you can just, boom, remove it. And this is a Mechanicum troop, so as long as it's a Mechanicum vehicle, you can remove it, and then you get Survivor 1 as well. For 1 energy. That's really nice. So that's why I keep it on there, but that can go on any Mechanicum troop, vehicle or infantry, or demon, because they have one of those. We'll get to that later in part 3, I think. Scrap code. This is such a disappointing tactic. I really wanted this card to do more. To do something else completely, honestly. For 1 energy, as Tacticate, I was so excited. The picture is very kind of cool. The concept of scrap code itself in the lore is very, like, it messes with your mind. But this card, reveal a card in your opponent's hand. If it's a tactic, it costs 3 more until your next turn. You get a draw card at least. It's not great. If you get a tactic from your opponent's hand, it costs 3 or more. Only if it's a tactic. And you have to reveal a card in your opponent's hand. You don't get to choose one of 3, so it's still random. So if they've got multiple cards and you just happen to pull a troop, you're stuck with it. It can still take a look and accidentally pull a Primarch's Whispers or Reckoning. Really what I hoped that this card would have done when it came out was something completely different, where it would have Reflection for 1 energy, reveal a tactic from the enemy hand. If it's reveal a card from the enemy hand. If it's a tactic, deal 2 damage to the enemy Warlord with Reflection, and then so really kind of punish players who built up big hands of tactics, and that is still a strategy that players do. There's still decks that run heavy tactics, and a single card, a single scrap code, could help shift the game in a different place. But this doesn't do that. This doesn't do that. So I'm just disappointed with this tactic. Like I said, at least you draw a card, but there are better cards to play. Absolutely. Servo Automata. This isn't a card that I would typically put in my deck. I talked about it with Tacticus Proctor, because he generates them, and that's usually the only time I see them is when they're generated. I wouldn't recommend playing this. Maybe if you're playing like a Garrow or a Warlord who just wants to swarm the board, or if you're playing a challenge, to dump some vehicles for cheap, this is an okay way to go about it. But I wouldn't recommend putting these in your deck. Tech Savant. This actually is not a bad tactic. This is a newer tactic added to the Game Last expansion, and I like the fact that it's choose a Mechanicum vehicle, put it in your hand for 1 energy, so it doesn't have to be in your deck. So for 1 energy, or if you play it early on or even late game, you could get some high cost stuff. You could get them in your options. You could get a Asherex. Okay, maybe you get a 3rd Doombringer if you're running 2, or a Neutrino Irradiator, which isn't bad. Or you could just get something, crummy like... You could get something crummy like the Servo Automata, but because it's a choose, you have 3 options. So ideally, you're going to get something that's decent. The vehicles here aren't too bad. There are a couple of high-cost vehicles that don't do anything, but honestly, there are some pretty good vehicles for the Mechanicum faction. Zainai feels like a go-to in a lot of decks, especially, it works good in events, it's nice, but especially like a Caliber Hall, this is a free way to not only create a Mechindrite for 1 energy, but also put a troop on the board that you can either put Mechindrites on, or you can use on your following turn if your opponent doesn't kill it to refill 2 energy, because that's Caliber Hall's passive. Very good card. Synergistic with the Mechanicum troops, especially if you're running infantry more than vehicles. This is an okay play. Depending on what Mechandray he can create, sometimes that can turn the tide of the battle. So this is a good rare. Alpha Row 25 also has its place in a variety of decks, and I should clarify. I mean, these are neutral, so it's not like they're just tied to Mechanicum. Zionite can go in a lot of faction decks. Alpha Row goes into a lot of decks that are kind of either spamming the board or that want to do something with setup. I like using Alpha Row with Ingethel because, the next turn she can bump him. He's in stealth, and she buffs his health so she can keep him alive, or she plays him on 3 energy. He's going to have at least 2 health, maybe 4 if he gets a Mark of Nurgle in stealth. So it's a good card for a setup at the very worst. It's a 3-1 distraction that your opponent has to get rid of, but because it's got stealth, then they have to contemplate, do they use their stealth hate for that card, or do they eat whatever you're going to put in their throat? So it's not bad. It just has a place in some decks. There are a lot of other cards that are better in it, but if you have an ability that plans on buffing a troop or pumping something up, or for instance Calber Hall's using it to get that 2 free energy, it has purpose. Melgator, Ambassador Melgator, this is a must buy. I said it on the original card by card for the Mechanicum troops. I'm saying it again. Ambassador Melgator is a must buy. His ability has been limited a little bit. He returns a troop with 4 or less attack to hand, but that is still very powerful, especially as the game has seen some changes to some of the troop decks that dominate or that are more powerful. Obviously, he's not going to affect units that are in stealth or that have ward. He can't affect, or you don't want him to use, you don't want to use him on units that have got strong rally abilities, but salamanders, some Imperial Fist cards, those cards that have, you don't want to stick, you don't want them, you can't get rid of them, at least you can buy yourself a turn, shift the momentum, and bounce them back up to your hand. Ambassador Melgator is a good card. Doesn't go in every deck, probably goes in at least, I'd argue, 75% of my decks. Just a good card to have. Combat Automata. This one here has a backlash, create a Mechandray in your hand. It's a 2/2 vehicle. A little bit different than the Servo, but it does similar things. It's got better stats. It just does it a little bit differently. But if you're running vehicles and you want to run a lot of vehicles on the board and make your opponent have to choose, this is a great way for the vehicle challenge, but this is also some very nice backup for attacking as Proctor. You mid-game, you make 3 or 4 vehicles, your opponent can only get rid of 1 or 2. They're going to be punished every time, and the fact that this creates a Mechandrite helps support the few infantry that you have in your deck. That's very nice. Cybernetic Cortex, talking about vehicles. This gives a vehicle +2/+2, and then it gives it attack by itself at the start of your turn. So it's a little bit of a trade-off. Now, first off, that +2/+2 is very nice because you can use that on the turn that you play this to have it attack where you want it to. You can turn 1, you play a Rotel with Proctor. Turn 2, it's a 3/3, and you play Cybernetic Cortex. It's a 5/5. You use Proctor's ability. You now have a 1/1 on the board. You have a 5/5. You're going to deal 5 damage. Then your opponent has got to deal with that 5/3, or on your next turn, it's going to get a buff from Proctor, so it's going to become a 6/4, and then it's going to attack by itself. And that is where your opponent can maybe circumvent it. They can throw up a front line or something. That's the problem with attacks by itself. So, Delta Psi 02. This, as I said, goes in some Proctor decks. This is some old art, but I always love the ink work and the line work on these kinds of this style. Front line. If you have a vehicle, it's a 3/3. If you don't, it's a 1/3. It's not bad in Proctor. Outside of Proctor, I wouldn't recommend it. It does come in a lot of draft packs, and typically those draft packs have a vehicle with them. That's not too shabby, but it's not the best. There are better front lines. 3 health won't get far, even if it's got 3 attack. But If you've got the right support for it, or at the very least it's that speed bump that you need, it's okay. I just wouldn't recommend putting it in your decks. Design Flaw is not bad. That is another not bad card. Change the maximum health of a vehicle troop to 1. The downside is it's only to a vehicle, and if they have ward, this card doesn't do anything for you, but this is a great way to 1 health a 10 health troop or an 8 health troop or something like that and get rid of them pretty quickly. I see it. I run into it occasionally. I don't run it myself. I'd rather run other things. But it's a nice surprise when you do see it. It is a way for people to deal with things like 8 health vehicles. The downside is it's only on vehicles. So I think if you're running into decks that are running a lot of vehicles, and we see that kind of go in spurts, then consider Design Flaw. Or consider the better options, Crack Grenade or Multi-Melta or Hard Removal or something else. But if that's your best card, the option that you've got, it is an answer. Gun Batteries. These were recently added with the last expansion. I play with them a little bit. It feels like a watered down turret for the Imperial Fists, because it is. It's a 1/3. It has 3 health as opposed to 2. But it's doing 1 damage as opposed to 2 as a resolution. And as a resolution versus a relentless, that's, and again, like, you're going to get at least 1 damage. The downside is gun batteries aren't really supported by anything. Like, whereas the Imperial Fist have an entire archetype built around playing things that either create or buff turrets. Gun batteries aren't supported by anything. Like, that's it. You can play 2 gun batteries. There might be a card somewhere down the road that we'll see that can create turrets or create gun batteries, but not at the same level that the Imperial Fist have. So you might get these with Automata formation, and in that case, maybe if you're playing Death of Innocence, they get a Mark of Chaos, and then they're a little bit stickier. That's probably your best case scenario if you get a couple of those for free from that. Otherwise, I don't think it has enough support to argue playing it in a deck. Intel Report. Your opponent draws a card, create a copy of it in your hand. This actually isn't too bad for decks that either A, like to just meme. I think Kyrene, you're at Kyrene of the Orphans of War, doesn't mind playing an Intel Report because he gets extra copies of your card. But this also works really well with the Alpha Legion, forcing your draw if they're playing a trap deck. And I know I don't like traps. I always say #don't play traps. But it's a way to force your opponent to draw a card, which might trigger a trap. Or maybe you use this to fill their hand up a little bit further so that you can stun them or play a card that benefits a large hand, or fill their hand to the point where it's overdrawing. And you get a copy of the card too, which is not bad. This is kind of like a poor man's Jubok. Your opponent gets the card, you get the card as well. You don't have a troop, it costs 1 less energy, and it's a common. Doesn't mean it's great. It certainly shouldn't be in every deck, but as I said, there are some decks that actually can make good use of it. If I'm playing Agents of the Sigilate, I might want to use that in some instances where I want to get more options in their hand and see what they've got and see what they're playing and force them to play that card that I also have a copy of. It's a mind game. It's a superior mind game. In some games, this is not a great card to play. If I make a copy of a Dark Angel that is wing specific, or I make a copy of a weapon, all I'm getting is a card that I can draw, or psychic ability for the Thousand Suns. Meanwhile, they get the psychic ability. So it's not for every deck. It's not for every matchup. It's okay. I like that it exists for the decks that can make use of it. If that's probably the best way to say it. Rotel. This is actually a really this card's been around since day one. Old school art. He's got 2 energy for a 2/2, but he comes in stealth, which works really good for Proctor to buff him. Works really good for Caliber Howl to use him on his next turn to get 2 free energy. Or you just have him sit and work as your stealth hate. Especially if you can buff his health a little bit so that he's not vulnerable to an artillery strike or defensive satellites, your opponent knows that they can't play just one stealth unit because you're going to be able to remove that from a unit every turn. They've got to put down multiple stealth units or they just can't rely on stealth. It's much like when you're playing against somebody who has used a Watchers in the Dark. Right? The Watchers in the Dark here. These guys who basically, if you're putting down a troop, hope it doesn't have an ability because they can just jam that. You've got to put down multiple troops. It's the same thing for stealth specific. It's dealable. You can deal with it with, like I said, artillery strike or defensive satellites. There's some warlords that deal 2 damage to random troops or that have a splash damage effect that can deal with Rotel. But for a couple decks, this is a very nice stealth hate. And not just the Mechanicum. For a lot of neutral or warlords that maybe as a player you don't have stealth removal, or as a player, let's say you're playing Cardosia. Cardosia wants vehicles so he can, because he's already going to be playing a bunch of vehicles in his hand, so he's got vehicle support. Well, here's a vehicle that gives you stealth removal. Although I'd argue the Iron Hands have already got stealth removal in their own faction. I mean, it's not huge, but maybe you want to use it with. I don't see it. A lot of people use it with. Oh gosh, I'm drawing a blank here. Yeah, Fabius Bile. If they're using it with Fabius Bile, because it's a stealth troop, it comes in, it's 2/2, you got stealth hate, then the next turn you pump it up. You enhance it, you make it stronger. It has its place. It's useful. It's not going to be, again, just like many of these cards, many of the neutral cards, they're not going to be in every deck, but some of them are more useful than others, and Rotel is a useful card. I also think Secretary Axiarch is a very useful card. If you want to play infantry, whether it is neutral infantry, whether it is Sisters of Silence infantry, Defenders of Caliban infantry, cultists, Imperial Army, anything that makes use of ample infantry troops, this is a way to go about it. Blood Angels using the arcology or using the displaced civilians, right? So that you've got a wave of displaced civilians and the next turn you drop Axiarch and they all have +1/+0. You've got to survive. I think that's probably a really awkward and slow play, but it's possible. Axiarch is a very nice epic. It's nice to have 2 of these. It really is. I recommend picking it up in the shop if you can, because it's very versatile. And like I said, if you're running a lot of infantry, this is a great card to support. It just automatically gives all of your infantry +1 attack. The fact that it has Survivor 1 means that it can last longer. And if you've got a warlord who can enhance your troops, maybe it's Ingathel with a buff, maybe it's Fabius Bile, maybe it's another warlord who gives Survivor like Numian or Atesh Tarsa. These guys can stick around for a long time and do their job even better. Terraforming. Choose an Imperial Army structure and put 2 copies of it in your hand. I've seen some memes with this for multiple Mount Pharaohs. It puts 2 copies of an Imperial Army structure in your hand. So, I mean, just knowing that, you've got to take a look at the list, because otherwise you're just playing it, and I guess you're getting either Underground Fort, Bunker, Mount Pharaohs, Crumbling Battleground. I guess you get a couple Crumbling Battlegrounds. That wouldn't be too shabby. Or the Command Bunker. Where is it at? Command Post. Command Post or Arcology. I think probably your best wishes, if you've got a Imperial deck, would be the Bunker, right? Like the Underground Fort, because getting 2 of those, and they reduce the cost of the Imperial Army troops. Like, you could drop a bunch of high cost stuff very nicely. But if you're playing just a random deck, having Mount Pharaohs, 2 copies of that's nice. If you're playing something that doesn't mind having the Arcology, that's also not bad. I would even argue in some decks, being able to drop a Crumbling Battleground and then the next turn follow it up with a second Crumbling Battleground isn't bad. I like the fact that it makes 2. It doesn't reduce the cost of them at all. But if you play this as a turn 1, you have 2 structures to do something with. And you can do some fun things depending on what you get, because you're getting 2 copies of it, and some of them double stack up. So it's neat. Is it something to build around? No. Is it something to add to a build? Yes. Transmechanic. This guy gives +1/+1 to your vehicles for 1 energy. This is a card. This is one of the troops that like your opponent doesn't want to have stick around. This is actually a really good ability. You can use this fairly reliably with either Warlord like Proctor, who's creating vehicles, or just having more vehicles in your hand, and your opponent knows that. This gives +1/+1 to your vehicles, not to a vehicle, to all your vehicles for 1 energy. That's a really good buff. The upside or the downside is that they are very vulnerable, so that's a good trade-off. But if they survive, even if you use this once and buff 2 vehicles, that's a pretty good use. So consider it if you're playing vehicles. Consider it if you're playing a lot of vehicles, if you're doing a vehicle build and you've got frontline, or you've got stealth, you've got like an escape vent or something to protect these guys. That would be a handy dandy target to protect, because then on the next turn, not only can you play vehicles, but you can use his ability and make your vehicles that are around the board stronger. And then your opponent has to decide, do I deal with the vehicle that you just buffed, or do I deal with this transmechanic? Can they deal with both? Sanite adds Sicularis. Not bad. For a 2/2, rally, deal 1 damage. I hyped up in the Agents of the Sigillant card by card, the Tallyman, which is the kind of the juiced up las rifle section. These guys are kind of a little bit downgraded las rifle, but they're Mechanicum las rifle, and there are a lot of synergies with the Mechanicum troops in general. And just being able to rally ping for 1 damage means a lot. That can stack. You can ping, take out a troop. You can ping the Warlord and KO. It's a good card to have. Does it mean you auto include 2 of them in your deck? No, but if you're looking for a good 2-drop, something to kind of help with response, if you don't have the las rifle section, or if you want to stick with the Mechanicum troops because you're playing Caleb Decima, or you're playing Kelber Hall specifically, it's nice to have. It's a free 1 ping with Scoria and a 2 body if you want to go that route. So, and the fact that, like I said, there are other cards that work with Mechanicum troops makes it worthwhile. So, not bad, not bad. That is it for the 2 cost, guys. That's the Warlords 0 through 2 energy Mechanicum cards, card by card. That's part 1. There's so much more to talk about, because a lot of the strong stuff, their best stuff, is 3 to 5. They've got some good 6 energy, but 3 to 5 is probably their best, includes. But there is definitely some stuff in here that is Ambassador Melgator, I would say auto-include, but very good to have. Axiarch, Rotel, those are good cards. They're not bad cards. The Warlords themselves are fun to play. I really hope that the card by card is interesting to you or not, or is interesting to you, not the not part. If it is, let me know. If there's some cards you think I kind of glazed over and didn't talk enough about, let me know as well. If you're having fun with Myrmidon Destructor, tell me about it. I like to hear what people have to say in the comments. And otherwise, I'll be seeing you guys here with part 2, hopefully sometime later this week or next. And we'll keep it going. That's it for me, guys. Until next time, keep playing Legions, and we'll talk to you later.